All right, what's up, my brothers? In this video, we're going to be talking about Canada. I get emails and call-ins from time to time on my podcast. People asking about my opinion on Canada is a good place to move to, often from guys from less than great countries that they're living in at the time, second, third world countries. So I've got 8 points here that I want to talk about when it comes to Canada. I've spent the better part of 40 plus years here. I've lived here most of my life. I've spent some time in the United Kingdom and in America, and I've traveled a lot, obviously, so I have some contrast as I dispense this advice. So listen up. All right, so the first thing is the weather. Today is a Saturday. It's a weekend. It's been raining like crazy for the last 4 days, on and off hard. We have a barbecue tomorrow that was canceled because my friend's pool has brown color in it. Basically, all the dirt from the forest around it has washed in. We've had horrible weather in Canada the last probably decade, I would say, at the very least. And before you go into, climate change, blah, 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 or global warming, let's just set that aside for a second. The weather here is not great. The wintertime is 6-7 months long. It's cold. Then you get a few weeks of spring with a massive mosquito and black fly season that usually ends in July. And then you get maybe a few more weeks of decent weather. But we don't get hot, long summers. We don't get mild winters like other places in the world. You don't have the best weather here, if we're being honest. It's cold in the wintertime, it's long, and it's dark. I remember looking at the stats back in January and February, and there was like less than 15% of the days of the month where there was actually sunshine. But this is Canada. The weather is not great. All right, and number two, let's talk about taxes. Everybody's favorite subject when it comes to Canada. Taxes here suck. They really do. Again, I've spent the better part of 40 plus years here, and they've just gotten worse and worse and worse. They just keep piling on new tax after tax. I remember when I was a lot younger, you could go and buy a car on the used car market and not pay a certain tax. Then they applied the tax onto that. And then there was luxury tax that they applied on vehicles. And then the income tax kept increasing year after year. And then they've got capital gains tax. So it's like they don't incentivize you in Canada to go out and chase excellence, to do something of some significance with your life, because half the year you're paying taxes to the government. Why do we pay taxes to the government when they can print an unlimited supply of money and there's no accountability for how they spend the money? They can literally do whatever they want. Sure, there's some yelling back and forth in Parliament, for the opposing parties trying to criticize the party that's in power, but taxes never, ever go down. They're continuously going up. Again, I've been here for 40 plus years. I've never seen taxes go down. There's certain things that they've eased up on. We've seen some governments say, you don't have to pay for the stickers on your car, for example, anymore. We're not going to force you to do the smog tests on cars because all cars are very efficient. Like I said earlier, you're going to spend about half of your income in taxes. You're paying taxes on items that have already been taxed. I could go to the dealership, buy a brand new car, sell it. The guy that buys it next is going to pay tax on that car that tax has already been collected on. Then he sells it in turn to the third owner, and then that third owner is paying taxes on a car that's already had taxes collected on twice. The taxation system here is absolutely absurd. Anybody that has any moral compass, a brain cell operating in their head for a minute of their life, knows the tax system is crazy. It's absurd. The tax system is burdensome. It's heavy. By the time you factor in the income tax, the taxes you pay at the pump, the taxes you pay on goods and services, the property taxes, the taxes on the taxes, I can go and take my income, invest it, and then the profits that I make on that investment, I get taxed on money that I've already been taxed on to make that investment. You see what I'm saying? Canada has some of the highest tax rates in the world. There are some countries that are taxed slightly higher, but not much more than good old Canada. All right, the third thing I want to talk about is wokeness and politics. The politics here suck, guys. They continue to vote for government and policies that keep pushing the notions and ideas of rainbows, the alphabet crowd, progressiveness. There's nowhere that you can go in the summertime in urban cities in Canada where you won't see the variety of flags. You won't see the maple leaf flag anywhere. It's very rare to see that now. It's some version of the rainbow maple leaf or some other kind of inclusivity flag that is a mashup of some new thing that you have to embrace that they want to shove down your throat. In the school system, if you ask teenagers in high school right now, and I've done this, hey, what have they taught you guys about the blockchain and Bitcoin? Nothing. Kids in high school know nothing about the blockchain and Bitcoin, but they know everything about all the genders and the inclusivities and how you need to talk to somebody with certain pronouns and all that sort of stuff. They've been taught that since elementary school, and it's not changing anytime soon. It's just getting worse and worse and worse. Again, I've been here for a long time. I haven't seen this at the level that we're dealing with today until the past decade or so, but this is what people keep voting for. Canadians keep voting for big government that wants big tax rates, that wants to shove rainbows down your throat, that wants you to use modified language, i.e. pronouns, or they want to censor, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more. But the wokeness and the politics in Canada suck. You might see the pendulum swing in the other direction with this next election, and hopefully it does, but I don't know that you're going to see it improve significantly. The party that it should swing to, of course, will be a more conservative party, is probably what we'll see get more of the votes. But at the end of the day, the Conservative Party in Canada is more or less liberal light. It's red light. It's not going to be a change in the right direction because they don't want to offend a certain group of people. They still want to be as inclusive as possible, if I can put it that way. All right, let's move on to number 4. We'll talk about crime. Everybody's like, oh, Canada must be so safe. There's no guns there. You know, you're not allowed to own firearms, or it must be super safe because it's so difficult and gun crime must be low. That's not true. We have car hijackings here at record levels, higher than many places in the world, for a number of reasons. One, we don't have the ability to protect ourselves with firearms here. In the United States, you can keep a firearm, your glove box, on you, in your person, and you can defend yourself. In Canada, it's very easy for you to get black market firearms, and as a result of that, because of the geographic location of a large city like Toronto to ports, it's very easy for criminals to carjack you, take your car. Within the same day, it's in a shipping container and probably on a boat somewhere over to Africa or something like that. So carjackings are a huge problem here. In fact, the Toronto police made an announcement in the last few months because these carjackers will basically come to your house at night, scan your card, your car key, because it sends off a little bit of a signal, or they'll break in your house looking for your car keys just to steal your cars right out of your driveway. And they're not encouraging you to hide your car keys, put your car in your garage, maybe put a club on your steering wheel like we used to back in the day when I was a kid. They're basically saying if they come to your house and they're looking for your car keys, just give it to them. This is the way the police are asking us to handle moments like this. In Florida, you see a press release and then the cops are just like, yeah, if somebody trespasses on your property or breaks in your house, do us a favor and just shoot them. In fact, we encourage it. So there's a totally different message that goes on here, and as a result of that, criminals are taking advantage of people because Canadians are generally weak, uninformed, they don't have the ability to defend themselves, they don't know combat skills, most people that live here, and they certainly aren't able to use a firearm if you legally own one for self-defense. I legally own non-restricted firearms for the purpose of hunting and for sporting clays and stuff like that, and here you're not allowed to use them to protect your own property or your family. You do so, you're probably going to jail. All right, let's deal with number 5, which is housing costs and rental income. We have some of the highest housing costs in the world. I think maybe Australia might be right up there with us, but what you get here for your money is very small. So unless you're in the housing market, I've been in the housing market for decades now, so unless you're in the housing market, most people don't have the ability, or will not have the ability, if I can put it that way, to own a home, unless they've got a lot of help from family. Your typical 2,300 cookie cutter suburban home, 46-foot lot, 110, 115 foot deep sort of thing, $8,000 a year in property taxes is going to cost you probably about $2 million in the Toronto suburbs. So not even downtown, just in the Toronto suburbs. You take that same $2 million and go somewhere like Texas or another state where housing is a lot more affordable in the United States, and you can get a mansion with a 4-car garage on acreages with probably 6,000 square feet of living space and a pool in the backyard. You see what I'm saying here? The cost of housing in Canada is absurd. Rental, pretty high as well. I used to own a rental property downtown. I got rid of it a few years ago during the scamdemic, but you're going to be charging for about an 800 square foot condo, like a glass box in the sky, around $3,000, just under $3,000. I'm not sure what the rates are today, but that's what they were at the time. And if you're a landlord, you're screwed. I have a buddy of mine that's a landlord that owns multiple properties, and he has tenants that have terrorized him, and there's nothing that he can do. He has this one tenant that continues to run her water, and she's denying, she's lying to the authorities. He can't do anything to throw her out. She's basically squatting on his property. He's lost 4 or 5 other good tenants in his building because she's such a nightmare in the building with the continuous running water. You see what I'm saying here? Housing, as a landlord, as a tenant if you're renting, all of it is completely out of whack in Canada, and they haven't done and don't have the capacity to do anything to repair it or fix it. Let's move on to number 6, which is healthcare. Whenever I travel, people are like, oh, but you have free healthcare in Canada. We have healthcare. It's not totally free, and it's not good. I'll give you an example. I was skiing one winter, and I had an accident, and my leg might have potentially been broken. I needed to go to the hospital to get an x-ray and possibly cast it, depending on what the situation was. I waited for about 7 hours to be seen, to get an x-ray, because the lineup of people that show up in the ER is so absurd for the most ridiculous reasons. There was moms in there with like a sick sniffling kid, and she'd be like, oh look, there's a dot on his back that wasn't there yesterday, a little tiny zit or something like that, to the nurse. And it's like, you have this lineup of people that are forcing you to wait because you're not paying for healthcare. You just show up and it's free. So they go in there for any little thing. There was a guy literally there that was seen before me in the room beside me, and the doctor walks in, it's a curtain so you can hear everything. The doctor's like, okay, so what's up? And he's like, my knees really hurt. I've got a lot of pain. She's like, okay, well, what's been going on? Like, what led up to this? Oh, I was on a World of Warcraft raid for like 24 hours and I didn't move much and I was in my chair. And she's like, yeah, get up and move around. Like, what's the problem? It's like, you're fucking kidding me. Like, I'm sitting there potentially with a broken leg and I can't be seen to get an x-ray because some retard is playing Warcraft for 24 hours straight and won't walk and his knees hurt, or a bunch of women, with their sniffling kids need to get, checked out by a doctor over what's really nothing, just a common cold. Also, you don't get full coverage. There's a lot of things that healthcare doesn't cover. Like, for example, I get my blood labs run every 4 months. Most of it is an out-of-pocket expense. If you're a woman, you get your estrogen checked for free, but if you're a male, you have to pay to get your testosterone checked. So there's also some level of sexism as well. I can go right down the rabbit hole. There's a number of people who have complained about the healthcare system here. It's not great. My preference, from my experience and talking to my friends who live in the States, I'd rather pay out of pocket, to be honest with you, and get far better care and better coverage and be seen faster than the way things work over here. There's a lot of people in Canada that might get cancer that end up going to get treatment down in the States or elsewhere because the wait time for treatments and even some surgeries is so absurd, they actually leave the country. There's a brain drain of medical professionals from Canada because the government doesn't also pay them that much money to be here. So you see medical professionals here that go down to the States or to other countries where they can get compensated far, far better. And the next one I got on my list is refugees and immigration. Canada is a country of immigrants. There's no doubt about that. It's not like the States where you kind of melt in. It's like a melting pot in the States, whereas in Canada it's more of like a fruit cake. So you get a little bit of like these pockets of fruit in the bread as it's baked, and then they just isolate themselves here. They don't immerse themselves into Canadian culture. They stay within their kind, if I can put it that way, and they shop within their shops. It's very, very common here. If you go to a Chinese neighborhood, all the signage is in Mandarin. You go to an Indian neighborhood, same thing. It's always been that way here, and there's not a lot of integration, there's not a lot of commonality, there's not a lot of Canadian identity to it. And the other problem too is we have such a huge influx of immigrants and refugees coming into Canada now. It's driven up the cost of housing, which is another problem I talked about earlier. They're not doing anything to curtail it. They're not doing anything to produce or manufacture more housing for it. So that drives up the costs. There's a lot of people that I've seen now on street corners, especially in the city areas, not even in the cities now, it's actually pushed out in the suburbs, where they're saying like, hey, I'm a refugee, and they'll be walking around trying to collect money from you. And it's, at this point in time right now, it's a lot of Muslim women. I think that the husband is dropping off the wife or the wives at different corners to try to collect some money in that sense or regard. And it's everywhere now. Immigration is needed in Canada, but the level that we have it today is absurd. They should be encouraging those that live here to have families and give them tax incentives, significant tax incentives. There's countries in the world, for example, where if you have 3 or 4 more kids, you don't pay any income tax. There's no incentive in Canada for that. Instead, what they do is they just bring immigrants in and they deal with the population crisis, we have by just importing more people. Just shove them into Canada and that'll solve the problem, right? But they don't manage it properly. They're not discerning in their taste. When my family came here from England when I was super young, you had to prove income. There was due process. There was all kinds of things, hoops that you had to jump through to become a Canadian citizen. I remember I didn't become a Canadian citizen until I was about 12 or 13 years old, right? And I was a toddler when we came here. So there's a long waiting period. Today, now you can just show up and be like, yo, I'm a refugee. You get a cell phone, you get housing, you get transportation, you get a monthly allowance. There's all kinds of stuff that occur today, healthcare and all this sort of stuff, immediately. Whereas in the past, you had to show that you had some skills, you had to show a number of, you had to meet some prerequisites to be able to live here. And that just doesn't exist anymore. And then the last and final thing I want to talk about when it comes to Canada is the notion of censorship. The Liberal government, more specifically Trudeau, has gone out of his way over the years to introduce bills and basically point and sputter at anybody that has a different opinion from his woke agenda. And he's changing laws now in the sense or regard where if you say or do something that is not aligned with his agenda, it's considered hate speech, believe it or not. So the language isn't very clearly defined, if I can put it this way. So if I were to say something like, electric cars suck and I like gas-powered cars, that could be interpreted under the new legislation that's being passed as hate speech, which could include a fine, which could also include imprisonment, which is absolutely ridiculous. We're supposed to be able to speak our minds freely as human beings in the West. And this is being stripped away from us by a government that is passing laws and legislation that's so broadly worded, designed to protect those that are potentially going to experience hurt feelings over speech. And I just don't get it. I just don't get it. And there's a lot of people that are coming here now that are also leaving shitty countries that are like, yo, I left that and now I've got more of that over here. So it's gotten that bad now. Anyway, I want to hear what your guys' experience is. If you're Canadian, what did I miss on that list? If you're outside of Canada and you've traveled here, what's your experience been? Pinned in the top comment below, a bunch of useful links to my stuff on my website. See you guys later. Peace out.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough,